Doing an intended thing in an unintended way is known as your what? Is known as your hack, right? Taking a very general example for that. Everyone might have used this cold drink bottle, like, Coca-Cola, for example, right? I guess Indians might relate with this example a lot, right? So if you drink this, Coca-Cola in a bottle, after utilizing it completely, what do you do with that bottle? Do you throw it on a trash, or do you use that bottle as a, not like, as a bottle of water? Want to say the sole point over here is, what was the sole purpose of that bottle? It was to serve the cola, right? The Coca-Cola, isn't it? The cold drink. But instead of that, we are using that bottle for as a bottle of water, isn't it? You might have seen, like, a lot of it's going on a trend. Uh, this DIY hacks, do it yourself, isn't it? You might have seen a lot of things are going on a trend over the social media platforms. For example, you might have seen, like, if you chuck bottle of, wine, after that, that wine bottle can be used to decorate, isn't it? You put in some fairy fairy lights inside that bottle and use that bottle for the decoration purpose. Am I right? An unintended way is known as your what? Is known as your hack, right? So actually, when you talk about hack, or when we talk about a hacker, if we talk about a hacker, hacker is someone who is, very well, he's like a more knowledgeable person who have a strong hold in both the concept, like regarding your hardwares or your computer devices, as well as your networking. You power on your system, this is this whole processor. If you look at your processor, behind that processor, have you ever seen these pins are over there? Ever seen that? So these are your what? This is a 16-bit registers over here. So in this register, what happened, guys? As soon as you power on, as soon as you power on your machine, the very first register it lits up. Okay, it's lits up, and this at this register, it holds the address of this, right? And this address, what it does, as soon as you power on a system, it takes you to this address, and this address will be pointing out to your what? To your BIOS. BIOS will be running a diagnostic testing, right? A diagnostic testing sequence known as your post power on self test to determine. Have you ever seen, like, in the previous versions of the Windows? Have you ever seen, like, there was an when you power on your machine, on the black screen it says, it will be checking a CD drive that it's working fine, your disk drive, your keyboard check, mouse is working fine, something like that. It always displays these messages. Ever notice that? Yep. So that is the work which your BIOS is doing over there. All right. The diagnosis testing sequence. So it will determine whether your computer keyboard, mouse, RAM, disk drives, hard disk, whether they are working or not, right? So what happens after checking each and everything? Okay, after checking each and everything, it goes to your MBR. Before I talk about MBR, just wanted to let you know that, guys, this thing which is mentioned over here, like, when you power on your machine, it goes to your BIOS. This is something known as your logical. It's never hardwired. It's totally logical. Okay. If anyone asks you about how it does go to the BIOS, it's never like it's hardwired back in the motherboard. No, never. It contains that address that points out to your BIOS. All right. Okay. So first of all, if you know about your hard disk, guys, how does your hard disk looks like? And even what is the shape of your hard disk? So your hard disk in reality just looks like this way, the disk shape. And what happened in that hard disk is we have your multiple sectors into it. We have multiple sectors into it. Let me just draw it for you. Over here, and something will be drawing like this. Okay, just to give you an idea. Okay, so actually, if we talk about MBR, guys, MBR has a size of 512 bytes. Okay, it has a size of 512 bytes, and that too is stored in your sector 0. In short, sector 0 or any sector has a size of 512 bytes. First of all, is this in clear? So every sector is of 512 bytes. So if we talk about sector 0, where might be the sector 0? You can consider that sector 0 might be somewhere over here. Okay, somewhere over here. So basically, this hard disk, this hard drive is consist of multiple sectors. So if I say sector, this is one sector. This is another sector. This is another sector. This is another sector. Is that clear? Correct? So, whenever you create a file, it saves in your hard disk, isn't it, guys? It saves in your hard disk. Do you agree with that? So, having said that, let me just show you one thing. Uh, just a small concept, just to give a quick idea. If I create a new document, let's say with the name test, open it up, and inside the test, if I write hello, and if I save that file, if I close that file over here, and I will right click on it, I will click on the properties. Can you see the size of the file? This, like, whatever we save the file, it takes some space in the hard disk, but it says 0 bytes. Any idea what happens over here? So what I will do, I will take this, save this, let's try. Can you see 4 KB?
Yeah.
Size of this, and the size is 1 KB of the file, right? Let's say it's worth 1 KB. So you might have got an idea by this, like, it might have surpasses a certain number, and after that it got the size on the disk, right? You might have guessed by that by now, isn't it? It might have surpasses some certain size number, and as soon as it surpasses that size number, we got the size on the disk, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right? So yeah. So what happened in this scenario is, actually at this point we have clusters in the picture. We have what? We have clusters in the picture. So just to give you an idea what happened with this scenario is, actually guys, let's say this is a cluster. If we talk about a cluster consists of your 8 sectors. How many? Cluster consists of your 8 sectors, which makes the size of a cluster how much?
8 into
One.
5 or 4.
Yes. Can I say around 4 KB?
Yeah.
Yep. 4096 is around 4 KB, right?
Yeah.
So consider this as a cluster. Uh, okay. Consider this as a cluster. Let's say the size of this cluster is your 4 KB. You can consider cluster something like this, whenever we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These many of the sectors, we include a cluster into it. Okay, so let's say we have a 4 KB of cluster right over here. And for example, we have created a file before also. And what happened is, let's say the same scenario which we have seen just now. The size of the file was 1 KB and the size on the disk was 4 KB, right? So similarly, take an example. There was a file in our hard disk which we might have created before. And for example, if the size of the file is what? If we, let's say the size of the file was 3 KB, right? If we say size of the file was 3 KB and the cluster it was allotted was 4 KB. So can we say this 1 KB is of a free space? Yes. This 1 KB is a free space, right? Because the size of the file was 3 KB, isn't it? Everyone
Yes.
agree with that? Yep. So this space is known as your swap space. And I'm extremely about my sorry about my handwriting. Okay. So if you need me to rewrite, I can rewrite it. But just telling you this free space, guys, this is known as your swap space. So what was the scenario? What happened with us? Whenever we were creating a file, like remember we were creating a file with the name test, and I just wrote hello inside it, right? So hello only took 5 bytes, correct? Right? And zero size on the disk. This was the scenario. So what was happening? Let's say, whenever the file was of 5 bytes, it was stored someone in someone else's swap space. So as soon as that file exceeded the size of the swap space, it was allotted its own cluster. Okay, it was allotted its own cluster, and the size of the file was 1 KB, around 1.05 KB, something like that, or 50 KB was the size of the file, and rest of the thing was your swap space. Got the idea what happened behind the scene? That is on your cluster. Okay, getting back to the this MBR thing, since I was talking about MBR, so quick overview of these things. So as we mentioned, MBR is the size of 512 bytes, right? So on this, you can see, we have a bootloader, right? Yeah, MBR, we have a bootloader. Then guys, we have a partition table and we have a OS signature into it. Okay, OS signature. So partition table will be of your 64 bytes. OS signature is of your 2 bytes, which makes your bootloader of how much of a size? MBR is 512 bytes, right? If I say partition table is of 64 bytes, OS signature is of 2 bytes, which makes the bootloader of your 446 bytes. Okay, all right. So bootloader, it will just loads the data into the system software into the main memory as soon as the device is started. That's what you also said. Moving on to the partition table, you might have noticed this thing whenever you install your Windows. Have you seen that it gives you an option to do the partitions of the drives? Ever notice that? So if I talk about this partition table, it is, guys, in MBR, it is divided into 4 parts, 16 bytes of each. 16 bytes. So in this 16 bytes, these are the primary drives you can create while installing a Windows. So you might have noticed while installing Windows, there is one mandatory partition drive, which goes by the name system partition, or previously it was known as system reserve. Okay, that is a mandatory drive that you have to keep while installing a Windows into it. All right, I'm just talking about what was the scenario or what are the weaknesses in this MBR system. You install the 16 byte, that is mandatory over there. So let's say one is occupied, and let's say if you want to install Windows and you are giving only one primary drive, that is a C drive, for example, just for example. So you have utilized 32 bytes, and how much of the bytes are free? 32, isn't it? So the problem with the MBR was it was static. It was static as in 64 was divided into 4 parts, and that was static. You cannot change that. So since I said rest 32 bytes were free, so things as an attacker's perspective, would that space would be sufficient for an hacker to edit the MBR, like target that space and put a line of code over there? Do you think 32 bytes of a space is more than enough to write a small piece of code? Yep. So that's why we said MBR was very vulnerable into these things, right? So attacker could take advantage of this. He can write a piece of code over there, and he can either he can do what? He can toast your hard drives. He can increase the RPM speed of that, and he can toast the hard disk right over there. So this was the reason why we upgraded to another thing which goes by the name GPT. It's a GOID partition table. It's a dynamic one. So what happens as soon as if you're utilizing only 32 bits of space, you won't be getting any free space over there. It will be just limited to 32 bits. That's it. Even if you buy new systems, SSD hard disks are there, but still if you buy the new system, you can check into your hard drive, you might find GPT mentioned right over there in the latest one I'm talking about. All right. Is this overview clear? Because reason why I told you, because as an attacker's perspective, you should know about the system, and MBRs can be exploited by the malwares, if you know about it, right? We can target the hardware and the operating system with the malwares. And which malware can, attack these things? Rootkit. Everyone agree with that? Rootkit.